In the summer of 1973, a quiet beach town in California was living in paradise until an 11-year-old girl named Linda Ann O'Keefe disappeared while walking home from summer school. She was last seen standing beside a turquoise van, talking to a stranger. The next morning, her body was found in a shallow ditch. For nearly half a century, her killer lived freely with a new name, in a new state, building a whole new life on top of a dark secret, until the past finally caught up with him. In the most unexpected way imaginable, exposing the monster that had taken the little girl's life. Linda's story reached 7 million people around the world. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Linda Ann O'Keefe was 11 years old in the summer of 1973. She was the middle child of 3 sisters, growing up in a modest house on Orchid Avenue in Corona del Mar, a small coastal community right next to Newport Beach. Her father, Richard, was a machinist. Her mother, Barbara, was a gifted artist and seamstress who sewed most of the family's clothing by hand. Linda's older sister, Cindy, remembers her as someone who was shy, quiet, the kind of kid who wouldn't draw attention to herself in a school hallway, but who truly lit up around people she trusted. Her smile, her friends remembered, could make you blush just from receiving it. Linda loved nature in a way that seemed almost otherworldly for an 11-year-old. On family camping trips to the redwood forests, she would crouch beside mountain creeks and wait perfectly, patiently still until small creatures wandered directly into her hands. Tiny frogs, little butterfly. They came to her as if they knew something. She had that kind of gentleness. She was a Girl Scout. She loved Nancy Drew mystery novels. And she had the musical taste of an old soul, Billie Holiday, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, blues and soul that most children her age had never heard of. Her favorite song was God Bless the Child. Her closest bond was with her father. Richard would go out to the garage to work, and Linda would follow, handing him tools, staying close, the way children do when they simply want to be near someone they love. They didn't need to say much. They just liked being in the same place. Corona del Mar in 1973 was, as one of her classmates put it, decades later, like Shangri-La. Kids rode bikes and let the days unfold on their own. Nobody worried. Nobody looked over their shoulder. It was the kind of childhood that feels mythological now, completely free, completely safe. It was a Friday, 2 days after the 4th of July. The kind of summer day that should end with dinner on the porch and the whole weekend still ahead. Linda was attending summer school at Lincoln Intermediate School. A familiar place, familiar hallways, familiar faces. Most days she rode her bike, but that Friday, she didn't have her bike. She would have to walk the 1.5 miles home. At around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Linda went to the school office and made a phone call. She called her mother. She was tired, she said. "Could Mom please come pick her up?" Barbara was busy with work. "Just walk home, Linda. You'll be fine." Linda hesitated. She really was tired. "Please?" "You'll be okay." Linda hung up the phone. Her classmate Lisa saw her leaving the office sad, quietly crying. They said goodbye and walked in opposite directions. That was the last time any of her friends ever saw her. Linda sat on the curb outside the school for a few minutes, feet stretched into the road, not quite ready to start. Then she stood up and began walking. At approximately 1:15 the afternoon, a 19-year-old woman named Jandy, who lived just a few houses from the O'Keefes, was driving with her mother along Marguerite Drive when they passed the intersection with Inlet Drive, about a mile from Linda's house. She saw Linda standing by the roadside, next to a turquoise van. The driver's door was open. A man sat behind the wheel, talking to her. Jandy didn't stop. She didn't feel danger. Linda was a neighborhood kid, almost always with family or friends. It looked a little odd, maybe, but not alarming. Jandy kept driving. She wouldn't understand what she had seen until that evening, when she came home from work and found police cars lining the street. Her sister told her Linda O'Keefe was missing. Jandy went directly to the detectives and told them everything she remembered. But she hadn't written down a license plate. She hadn't seen which direction the van drove off. She had the color turquoise and a general description. White male, curly hair, tan skin, mid to late 20s. That was all. That was the last confirmed sighting of Linda Ann O'Keefe alive. The search began that evening and ran through the night. Officers combed alleys and park trails. Linda's father drove slow loops through the neighborhood. Her friends, most of them 11 or 12 years old, got on their own bikes and rode around looking for the turquoise van because it was the only thing they could think to do. At around 11:30 that night, while the search was still active and Linda's parents were still waiting, a woman living on the bluffs above the Back Bay area heard something outside her window. A female voice, screaming, "Stop, you're hurting me." The woman did not call police. She didn't know a child was missing. She didn't know that down below, in the darkness, an 11-year-old girl was fighting for her life. Investigators would later say that a call at that moment would have triggered an immediate, massive response, a net drawn tight around the entire area. There was a real chance Linda could have been saved. The call was never made. And by morning, Linda Ann O'Keefe was dead. On the morning of the 7th of July, 1973, a local architect named Ron Yo was biking along a nature trail at the Back Bay with his young son. He glanced to the side of the trail, a girl's body, half hidden in the weeds beside a ditch, small, still wearing the dress her mother had made for her. Linda Ann O'Keefe had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. The coroner placed time of death between midnight and 2 in the morning, 12 hours after she was last seen alive. On her body were the signs of a desperate struggle. She had fought back. Linda's father was the one who identified her body. He came home and sat on the porch and wept, and his older daughter, Cindy, who had been waiting, understood before a word was spoken. Newport Beach police launched a full homicide investigation, composite sketch, van registration searches, witness interviews. A false confession came from a young man named Peter Wooten, who had graduated with Cindy. He was held for 2 days, failed every question only the real killer would know, and was released on the very day Linda was buried. That cruelty only deepened the family's grief. Nothing led anywhere. The turquoise van was never found. The killer had no criminal record in California. The leads dried up, one by one, until there were none. But before the case went cold, one investigator made a quiet decision that would matter more than anything else in the decades to come. Forensic scientist Jim White collected biological material from Linda's body material left by her attacker and preserved it carefully in a small glass vial with a screw cap. In 1973, DNA technology in criminal investigations did not exist. There was no national database, no framework for imagining that a swab from a crime scene could one day spell out a killer's name. There was no technical reason, strictly speaking, to keep what Jim White kept. He kept it anyway, because a careful investigator preserves what he has and trusts that future science will know what to do with it. That small glass vial went into a freezer. It would wait there for 46 years. Linda's photograph went up on the wall of the Newport Beach Police Detective Division, not because any regulation required it, because the people who worked there felt the unanswered question and wanted every generation of investigators who passed through that door to inherit it. New officers learned her name. Retirees left without an answer. Decades turned. The photo stayed. The O'Keefe family never recovered. Barbara carried the guilt of that last phone call for the rest of her life. If only, that guilt shortened her life, Cindy believed. Richard and Barbara both died without ever learning who had taken their daughter. Meanwhile, the man responsible was quietly building a new life far from California, and he had no intention of ever being found. His real name was James Albert George Layton, a man who had drifted from Chicago to Southern California before the murder, settling in Orange County, just 30 minutes from Corona del Mar. He worked construction. He had no deep roots in the area. No one knew him well enough to look twice, but beneath that unremarkable surface, there was a history. In 1966, he had been arrested for having an underage girl in his car, a charge that should have flagged him, a pattern that had already begun. No one in Newport Beach knew any of it. After killing Linda, Layton made 2 calculated moves. He left California immediately and relocated to Florida. Then, far more deliberately, he changed his name. James Albert George Layton became James Allen Neal, a new identity, a clean severance. The man Newport Beach police were searching for had, on paper, ceased to exist. Neal eventually settled in Monument, Colorado, a quiet community south of Denver. He married, he had children, then grandchildren. To anyone who knew him, simply an older man living out his retirement in the mountain cold. But the pattern never stopped. From 1995 to 2004, when Neil was in his 50s and 60s, he sexually assaulted 2 more young girls in Riverside County, California, 30 years after Linda, the same man. New victims, still free. While Linda's photograph hung on the wall of the Newport Beach Police Department, James Neal was still out there, waking up every morning in a world that did not know his name. That was about to change. His real name was James Albert George Layton, a man who had drifted from Chicago to Southern California before the murder, settling in Orange County, just 30 minutes from Corona del Mar. He worked construction. He had no deep roots in the area. No one knew him well enough to look twice, but beneath that unremarkable surface, there was a history. In 1966, he had been arrested for having an underage girl in his car, a charge that should have flagged him, a pattern that had already begun. No one in Newport Beach knew any of it. After killing Linda, Layton made 2 calculated moves. He left California immediately and relocated to Florida. Then, far more deliberately, he changed his name. James Albert George Layton became James Allen Neal, a new identity, a clean severance. The man Newport Beach police were searching for had, on paper, ceased to exist. Neal eventually settled in Monument, Colorado, a quiet community south of Denver. He married, he had children, then grandchildren. To anyone who knew him, simply an older man living out his retirement in the mountain cold. But the pattern never stopped. From 1995 to 2004, when Neal was in his 50s and 60s, he sexually assaulted 2 more young girls in Riverside County, California, 30 years after Linda, the same man. New victims, still free. While Linda's photograph hung on the wall of the Newport Beach Police Department, James Neal was still out there, waking up every morning in a world that did not know his name. That was about to change. The technological steps came slowly. In the late 1990s, Jim White's preserved evidence was finally sent to a lab. The biological material still yielded results after 2 decades in frozen storage. A DNA profile of an unknown male was created and uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's national criminal database. In 2001, no match. Neal had never been arrested in a way that put his DNA in the system. The profile sat in CODIS, waiting. Then, in April 2018, the arrest of the Golden State Killer solved through genetic genealogy by uploading an unidentified DNA profile to a public database and tracing the family tree backward to one name showed the world what was now possible. For Linda's childhood classmates, who had never stopped thinking about her, the message was immediate. They formed a Facebook group and walked into Newport Beach PD. We think it's Linda's turn. They didn't know her photo was already on the wall. They didn't know what Sergeant Dew was already planning. On the 6th of July, 2018, exactly 45 years after Linda walked out of school and never came home, Newport Beach PD did something no law enforcement agency in America had ever done. They paused all regular Twitter activity, and for one full day, they gave Linda back her voice, one tweet at a time, chronological, hour by hour, starting with the morning of the 6th of July, 1973, and ending with the discovery of her body the following morning. Each tweet was written as Linda speaking, Linda, narrating her own final hours. Hi, I'm Linda O'Keefe, or Linda Ann O'Keefe if I'm in trouble with my mom. 45 years ago today, I disappeared from Newport Beach. I was murdered, and my body was found in the back bay. Now, 45 years later, I have a voice again, and I have something important to say. The intent was to make people feel it, not just read about it. To walk home from school with Linda, to stand next to the Turquoise van, to experience the weight of one afternoon in a way no press release could ever achieve. It worked beyond anything they had imagined. 7 million impressions worldwide, trending across South America, Europe, Australia, France. Linda's childhood friends, now in their 50s, read the tweets feeling like 11-year-olds again, desperately wanting the girl in the story not to get in that van. And among those 7 million people was C.C. Moore, head of genetic genealogy at Parabon Nanolabs, who had known about Linda's case since college. She contacted Sergeant Dew. She would help them find the man in the van. The suspect DNA was uploaded to Family Tree DNA, a commercial genealogy database that in December 2018 opened its records to law enforcement for violent crime investigations. CC and the team began building family trees from partial DNA matches, tracing distant relatives through public records, obituaries, social media. Branches grew and stalled. trees were built and abandoned. The process was painstaking. Then came a phone call. A senior director at Family Tree DNA called Sergeant Dew. His tone was almost casual. "I think I have your suspect identified," he said. Dew assumed it was a close family member, another step in the tree. "No," the director said. "I think I have your actual guy." The explanation was almost surreal. James Allen Neal had voluntarily submitted his own DNA to Family Tree DNA because he wanted to research his family history. He had created a public profile. He had a family tree posted online for anyone to find. The man who had changed his name, crossed state lines, and spent 46 years in careful anonymity had uploaded his own genetic fingerprint to the internet. In January 2019, Detective Mike Fletcher and a small team flew to Monument, Colorado, -6 degrees Fahrenheit. 3 detectives from Southern California, sitting on surveillance in conditions none of them were dressed for, watching a 72-year-old man live his ordinary retirement life. They needed fresh DNA collected without his knowledge to confirm the match before any arrest. They noticed Neal was a smoker, and they noticed something strange. Every time he finished a cigarette, he crushed it out and slipped the butt into his pocket. He never threw it on the ground. The detectives exchanged looks. Their immediate thought, "He knows." He had followed the Golden State Killer case. He understood what a cigarette butt could do. They watched. They waited. Days passed in the cold. Then one afternoon, Neal walked out to a grocery store parking lot, smoked a cigarette, and flicked the butt onto the asphalt. The team moved immediately. As it turned out, Neal had not been protecting his DNA at all. Colorado imposes an exceptionally high fine for littering with cigarette butts. He had simply run out of patience for one moment. The butt went to the Orange County Crime Lab. The result: a complete single-source match with the DNA Jim White had preserved in 1973, 46 years, confirmed by a discarded cigarette in a parking lot. On the morning of the 19th of February, 2019, at approximately 6:30 a.m., detectives arrived at Neal's home and placed him under arrest. Calm, cool, and collected, he did not resist. On the drive to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department, he began talking freely, admitting to molesting multiple children over the years, blaming alcohol, speaking about it with a disturbing ease. But when the conversation reached Linda, everything changed. In the interrogation room, detectives put her photograph on the table. "You remember this girl, Jim?" "No, sir." "Have you ever seen her before?" "No. She looks almost like one of my kids in a picture." "But no. You don't remember picking this girl up on the side of the road?" "I have never picked up any kids. Ever." For 3 hours, they worked him. They laid the DNA results in front of him, a single-source male profile, 100% match. Neal looked at the paper. "It must be miraculous," he said quietly, "because it wasn't me." He understood what DNA was. He understood what 100% match meant, and still the words would not come. Then detectives stepped out of the room, leaving Neal alone with Linda's photograph on the table. The camera kept running. Neal looked at her face. He leaned slightly forward, and he spoke quietly, to no one but himself, and a girl who had been dead for 46 years. "I'm sorry, baby, but it wasn't me." Not only a denial, the word sorry, the word baby, intimate, familiar, from a man who claimed he had never seen her. A man who had spent 46 years telling himself whatever story he needed to keep going. When detectives returned, they made one final attempt. "You've had 45 years to convince yourself you didn't do this, Jim. It's time to take responsibility for what you did to this little girl." "I didn't do it, and I don't need to be responsible for something I didn't do." He was placed under formal arrest for the murder of Linda Ann O'Keefe. On the 20th of February 2019, Newport Beach PD and the Orange County District Attorney's Office held a joint press conference. The man at the podium was DA Todd Spitzer, who had been 12 years old in 1973 when Linda was killed, nearly the same age as her. "This significant arrest," he said, "is a confirmation that we never give up on solving cold cases." Neal was charged with murder with special circumstances, plus 2 additional sexual assault charges from Riverside County. If convicted on all counts, he would never leave prison. Linda's sister Cindy received the call that morning. "Are you sitting down?" When Sergeant Dew told her, time slowed the way. It had on the 7th of July, 1973, when she had stood on the porch and understood what her father's weeping meant. "I wish my parents were here to hear this. I wish they could have known." They never did. Richard and Barbara O'Keefe both died, without knowing who had killed their daughter. Barbara had carried the guilt of that last phone call for the rest of her life. If only I had gone to pick her up, she would still be alive. That guilt had consumed her. Then, one final turn. On the 27th of May 2020, James Allen Neal died in custody at the age of 73, hospitalized for an undisclosed illness, never having stood trial. No verdict. No moment in a courtroom where a jury looked at Linda's photograph and returned a guilty verdict. D.A. Spitzer's statement was blunt. James Neal's death before he could be brought to trial robbed the O'Keefe family of the justice they deserved. Cindy Borgeson said she had already forgiven the man who killed her sister before she ever knew his name. She could not carry that weight. God, she said, had protected her from a trial she might not have survived. Linda's photograph was removed from the wall of the detective division. After 46 years, the case was officially closed. Cindy still keeps the family portrait at home, the only one ever taken. Her mother, who looked like Jackie Kennedy. Her father, typical dad of the 1960s. 3 girls, all beaming. The family, as it was, whole and intact. Before the afternoon of the 6th of July, 1973, changed everything and never changed it back. The O'Keefe case isn't just a cold case solved. It carries specific, hard-won lessons for every family still living inside an unanswered question. The first lesson belongs to Jim White. In 1973, he preserved biological evidence when no technology existed to use it purely out of professional instinct. That single decision became the foundation everything else was built on. If you have a loved one in an unsolved case, ask the investigating agency directly. Has the biological evidence been retested with modern DNA technology? If you don't ask, no one may. The second lesson is about storytelling. When Newport Beach PD launched Linda Story in 2018, they had no new leads, none. What they had was the willingness to tell an old story in a new way, and it reached 7 million people, connected them to CC Moore, and set everything else in motion. Proper media pressure, through the right channels at the right moment, can open doors that no new lead ever could. The third lesson is the most painful. While Linda's photo hung on that wall as a symbol of unfinished justice, James Neal sexually assaulted 2 more children in Riverside County. A cold case is not just delayed justice for one person. It is an open window for a predator to keep operating. Linda just wanted to go home that afternoon. She never made it. But 46 years later, she got something back. Not full justice, but a name, and the end of a very long silence.